It's not relevant to the orientation. The orientation of this is not relevant.
All right, yeah, right.
Really good.
So we keep welcome Jimmy Metyko, Jimmy Metyko.
Welcome, everybody. I want to first by saying I still am a photographer. So I still come out here, but I do it on strike missions based on, can you hear me? Everybody good? But I did get away from it for a long time before I came back. And the book is pretty much takes place from 80 to 83. Jamie has been involved in this project from the start. We were lucky enough through Jamie to connect with Rizzoli Books, with the editor there that Jamie's friends with, Martinka, and then the publisher of Rizzoli, Charles Myers, got behind the project, and it was just went from there. But I'd like to take a few moments to thank Jamie for his involvement, and then also thank California Surf Museum for hosting this. And then also my wife over here who has been a part of this and helped every way. She's over there ignoring me. And I'd like to say, before I hand the mic over to Jamie, one other thing is it's very awkward for me to be talking with Steve Pesman, Jim Kempton, and Scott Hewlett. And I'm but a passer-througher in this history of surfing. And these guys, to me, are some of the great guys that have overseen the history of the sport from the get-go, from my get-go. And it's really going to be, I think I'm going to really overthink everything I say, like a lawyer who is being cross-examined. You know, he's thinking about every possible scenario of every word. And I'll be thinking about that to make sure I'm not fact-checked by these guys later. So.
Don't worry.
Who said that? Okay, thank you.
My intro,
Okay. Oh, okay, yeah.
My intro is very brief. I met Jimmy in 1981. I think I just turned 15 years old. Jimmy would have been 19 or 20. He seemed so much older. And he had a camera, and he was photographing the scene of Santa Barbara, Ventura, and then sometimes down in LA. And we started chasing waves. We started chasing good light, and all these things. There was the photographic aspect that was new to me. But unbeknownst to us at the time, a lot of these people went on to become, important figures in the history of surfing. So that's it. Here's Jimmy. We're going to do the slideshow. Then we're going to do a Q&A, which I'll ask Jimmy some questions. But really, we'll turn it to all of you, and we'll go from there. And thanks for coming.
One more preference. Just, I'm sure a lot of people remember this period and what it was like pre-social media. And just to emphasize how important the magazines were back at that time. There were several magazines, and it would be like having 3 social media sites that gave all content for surfing. And it would go through these groups of people at each of these magazines, and that would be what the history of surfing is. So I'm very involved in social media. I'm very active in it. I'm definitely living in the present, but I will constantly talk like the magazines to even kids half my age or even in their teens as if that's still a reality, and they'll look at me like, what are you talking about? So if I get caught up in that, hopefully y'all follow me in what I'm saying. So the first thing, Willie Morris, is who the book is dedicated to. He's one of the people that I shot and one of the people Jamie and I were involved with at that period. And he was actually younger than myself. but he was so bigger than life, and he became a professional surfer and went through that experience the way I always wish I would have if I was of that skill level. And so we all looked up to him and admired him, and he passed away 5 years ago?
2018.
2018. So the book is dedicated to him. Okay. So just do... There we go. Here we are today. Is it Big Wednesday? Is that Big Wednesday.
Yeah.
So what I'll do is I'll just talk about the photos. If anybody has any questions, just, I'll give a little antidotes when we're needed. And if anybody has any questions, feel free. This is just Tommy. That's a twin fin. This is the NSSA days. That's at a place they call it Emma Wood now. Back then we called it Overhead Shore Break. Big spot back in the 60s when they surfed out at the outside, about a half mile out overhead. Again, Tommy I'll name spots. If anybody has a problem with that, you can shh me, but I'll still name them. Santa Clara River mouth.
Jimmy, you took all these with slide film too, right?
This is all film, and I will get into that a little bit, the difference between film and digital, because I shoot all digital now. I know a lot of the kids are heavily into film, and it's artsy and it's cool, and they say, why don't you shoot film? I say, because digital solves every problem we have with film. It wasn't a nightmare shooting film because it's all we knew, but looking back, it's kind of like anything that's antiquated that you look back and you say, how did you ever do it?
Jimmy, can you give the dates and the year?
So this would have been, in most of these images, I have a section in the back of the slideshow where it's not in the book, and it's just a little interesting section to end with. But most of these the whole book is done chronologically, and I actually may forget the date, but I'm pretty sure this is 1982.
Can I say one little thing?
Anything, yeah.
One thing that I failed to say is, so Jimmy took these pictures while he was a student at Brooks Institute in Santa Barbara, which at the time was one of the best photography schools in the USA. And this is basically his student work from the 4 years he was there. 1980 to 1983, correct?
Correct. I actually arrived in Santa Barbara in the fall of 1979, and as surfers are all many historians, it's important to me because I always wanted to feel like I had one foot in the 70s in Santa Barbara era, even though it was only 2 months. But I did shoot in the 70s in Santa Barbara. That's an accurate statement. As I talked about before, I grew up on the surf magazines. The surf magazines were absolutely everything. Growing up in a wave-starved place like Texas, where you would get a good day once a month, you went through each issue of the magazine, which came out. It used to be bi-monthly, then it came out monthly. You went through it 100 times. You memorized everything, memorized the photographers. So to come out here and be involved in all this was my goal when I got to that point in my amateur career as a surfer and realized that I was not going to be a professional surfer. And I said I wanted to contribute because it had given me so much. And where all this has led is I went to Santa Barbara because that's where Brooks was. I grew up since I was 14. My good friend over here, Jimmy Rudman, coming out to North County surfing every summer since 1974. I did not want to go to Santa Barbara. I knew nothing about Santa Barbara. I heard it was a backwater. I knew of Rincon. I knew of the ranch was somewhere nearby. I saw Tommy's not in this photo, but I saw him surf at the U.S. Surfing Championship in 1979, that summer before I moved out. I saw him surf, and I didn't even go out in my heat. I said, I will never be that good. I'm gonna switch over to be a surf photographer. And I got into Brooks, and it was my ticket out here was to go to Brooks. The fact that all this stuff with Al Merrick and Tommy and everything was pure luck that I stumbled into. I tell this to Jim Kempton. I would have been in Surfer Magazine by the grace of Jim Kempton and Steve Pesman, but it ended up being so much more because of these guys. So Al Merrick, this is probably either 80 or 81 because it's transitional. The thruster wasn't around yet. Those are triplane holes, which was the board that Al was making. And then you even see one guy has a Swallow, probably about a 7.2 single. So it was right in that transitional period from single to twin, not from twin to thruster. This is Tommy again at backside. It's called backside Rincon. It's just a beach break on the north side of the point. Tommy at Santa Clara River mouth. I tell this story in the book. He was before he signed with OP. He was being courted by Quicksilver, and Quicksilver sent him to France. And I get a phone call. He was back then. It was collect phone calls, if you guys remember, no cell phones. And I got this phone call. It's collect call from Tommy Curren. Do you accept? And I said yes. And he was in the airport in France and in Paris, and he said, "Do you want to go shoot tomorrow morning?" And so he arrived in LAX. We got up early. And the next morning, we got one of the best days I've ever shot with him. Got a cover shot and multiple published shots. And then he flew out that evening to Japan and won his first professional contest. And that has been Tommy's life ever since. Very early NSSA photo. I'm sure you guys can recognize, there's Kim Merrigan, Tommy, Alicia Schwarzstein, now married to Ian Cairns, Jim Hogan, Farnsworth, Gary, is it Glisby?
Clisby, yeah.
Glisby, Todd Martin, a North County guy.
Bluefoot.
Gluefoot, who said that?
I did.
Oh, yeah. Farnsworth, I think that's Lambresi next to Farnsworth. So a good collection of guys.
I said 84.
Sean, so another thing that happened in Santa Barbara when I moved there, Sean at that time would be the equivalent of Kelly Slater. He was the pro, and just before I moved there, he moved to Santa Barbara and then started to work with Al. And that was probably the start of this whole thing. With Tommy and Al progressing and moving in a certain direction away from what would have been the standards 7.2, 7.6 rounded single fin kind of point break style board. This shot has been like published almost more than any other shots. And the funny story about this is this was probably 81. And the late Art Brewer, I've been trying to get in the Surfer for maybe a year, getting nothing but rejection letters signed by Jim Kempton. And all of a sudden I get this card and it said, Jimmy, I hope you got an assignment. I hope you can do this. I need it ASAP. I need shots of Al Merrick. And Al Merrick was very unknown at this time. And this is before Google, before anything. I didn't know what ASAP meant. So I started going around everywhere trying to find out what ASAP meant. And I went to the manager at that time at Channel Islands, Kim Robinson, who was very instrumental in me starting my my networking through Santa Barbara. And I said, Kim, what's ASAP? And he kind of laughed. He says, they need it right away. And so he set it up with Al, and he goes, look, Al does not like to shoot from anybody who went to Brooks. He goes, but I'll make it work for you. So you walk into the shaping room. At this time, shapers are the shaping machines. You stop him, you stop production. And I was very conscious of that. I absolutely had no idea what I was doing. And I'm fumbling around. I had a flash that would not work. Back then, the flashes worked 50% of the time. And when you point it right at somebody, it's like what we used to call possum hunting, where their face is all blown out and everything behind them is black. And I said, okay, I'm going to bounce it against the ceiling. Got really lucky. They did not use this image. They used the image we took outside. But afterwards, this image became widely used. But anyway, that's the story behind that. I did not know what I was doing when I shot this shot. Here's a couple of shots Jamie is he moves so fluidly through so many different social circles, and he's such an intelligent and warm and friendly guy. You forget the fact that he was this hot little pro surfer at one time. So I want to remind everybody that he was the guy at one point. He was the guy following Willie at Malibu in that area at one time. Even though you're from the Valley.
From the Valley.
From the Valley.
How old were you when this was shot?
I think I was 14 or 15.
And as endearing and warm as Jamie is now, he was somebody. He was hard to handle at that point. he was a good-looking kid that was tall for his age and had everything going for him, and he knew it.
He's a hot chick.
He hates it when I say that, but he was a good surfer. So these are just a few shots of Jamie. Back, if you guys remember when Shane was riding McCoys and the Zaps and the singles and the incredible airbrushes.
You riding lasers, that?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Okay, so here's what I walked into in 1980. This is walking down the path at Rincon. You cannot park on the side of the highway anymore. There's a fence. The riprap rocks do not go all the way up to the top. It was a time where you see a couple of cameras, but very few cameras on the beach. I was shooting at Rincon in this last swell we had on the 28th, 29th, and 30th of December. And I just walking around the point to where I was going to shoot, I counted 50 cameras, 50 like $30,000 setups. And who knows how many iPhones. And I got this incredible shot of Connor Coffin, and I've seen it like 10 times, identical. Back then, if you shot, with serious equipment, you were the only person. There was no iPhones. Occasionally, a guy would film. As you can see here, Santa Barbara, walking into Santa Barbara into the very end of the 70s and the 1980s was like walking in 1975. The boards down south, the boards in professional surfing were more like 6'2", were really cool single fin shapes. Santa Barbara was all 7'2", like I said before. One stringer, sometimes three, single fin rounded pins.
Did you know Simone?
Do what?
Did you know Simone?
Yes. So here's the start of the relationship with Sean and Al. I did not know either of them at this point, but this was Sean Thompson, free ride. It took me about 2 years to actually get to know Sean and meet him because I was so scared to go up and talk to him. But you look at his board, then you look at all the red, single fins. He kind of put a shockwave into the whole Santa Barbara scene.
Great shot.
This is a pretty good day. This is the Cove at Rincon. And he was just trying. It was pretty amazing to watch. It was at this size. It's more likened to like him at Jeffreys Bay. If you remember all the photos that Divine and stuff took that were in Surfer of the trip at Jeffreys Bay, it's what it reminded me of. And it just, I remember that the guys would come down to the beach just to watch them to see how Rincon was surfed by because it was so completely different than what was being done at that time.
Who got on a thruster first, Sean or Tommy?
Sean took a long time to get onto a thruster. A long time. Tommy was, I think, 82 spring. I may get my dates a little wrong. Yeah. And I have one of the first photos of him on a thruster. This is with Tommy when I saw, like I said before, I saw Tommy surf in the United States Surfing Championship that was actually held in South Padre Island, Texas. And he was riding a single fin. Here he moved to a twin fin. Not this shot, but there you see, look at how round and piggy that board is. And that's Tommy's like 14, I think, here. Maybe, I think his birthday's like in July. So, yeah, I don't think it was 15 yet. And this is more early Tom. These are the first shots I took of him. And at this point, he was just a kid that swept out the shaping bays for Al in order to exchange for boards. And here he traded off with somebody aboard in the middle of the session. So now, Rincon, this is most of these shots are in the book. This is of interest because this is actually the way it appeared You could put cheesy filters in front of your lens. There was no after shooting post-work in Photoshop. What you shot is what you had. This is a stream of fire smoke that came over the foothills from Ojai. And unlike when we've seen fire smoke completely cover a whole area where it gets really eerie, and the next photo will show it to you, it's just one little thin stream. And so it blocked out all the blue wavelength. And this is literally how it looked. This is shot from the highway. And so that's the smoke. It was just like a finger of smoke that went all the way behind us over the foothills from a little fire that was in Ojai. I tried to look at what fire that was, and I guess it was small enough that I couldn't even find it recorded in the fire history. So here we have Matt George, Willie Morris, Willie's mom, Sandra, who passed away a while ago, Jimmy Redmond, Jimmy, hold your hand up. And then Sam George. This was like the best day that we ever got. We call it the Day of Dreams. It's been in the magazine many times, and it was a day that we stumbled upon at a spot that we never surfed before, where it was like, again, Jeffreys Bay, literally all day with slide-off shores. Nobody ever showed up, and we just basically had it all to ourselves. And it's, again, if anybody wants to me, go ahead. But this is Santa Clara River mouth, and back then it was managed different, and they had bulldozed it open, the estuary, every once in a while. And the night before, they bulldozed it open, and we checked. Rincon that morning was like 2 feet. There was actually a building swell that was missing Rincon going straight here. And just on a whim, we ended up checking this place. And the way the sand had spilled out into the ocean made a perfect 200-yard long right point break. And it was like this literally all day with about 6, 7, 10 max people out. And I eventually got out in the water that day. This was on the other side of the gully formed by the kind of sandbar was his left. That you could stand up in that wave and put your hands above you. It's that big, and nobody was surfing it. The late Chris Brown and his father, who also recently passed away, Dave Brown, as little kids. An interesting thing, I shot this shot not knowing Chris Brown was just a little Grom. He wasn't, wraparound Brown and what he became later in his career. He was just a little kid. And growing up in Texas, parents did everything they did to push you away from the surf. That wasn't considered a real livelihood. And so watching a father push their son towards the surf, I found very, interesting. So I turned around from shooting the surfing and shot a photo of him. And it's a funny thing, I tell photographers, they ask me, what should I shoot? I say, shoot everything. You have no idea what's going to mean something, 20, 30, 40 years from now. Tommy running back up the point for one last wave. So 81, this is Super Tubes. Super Tubes. Willie Morris at Rincon. For the disbelievers that you could shred a single fin.
Who was the last shot?
Hang on. His name is in the book. I don't remember it. So every time that Super Tubes breaks like once, maybe twice a year, he was always there. I have shots from every time I went, and he's always doing a peace sign. Here he's doing the double peace sign. I think he has passed away as well. But he was in the surf world, as we all know, there's some characters. He has quite a interesting history. Some of his dear friends were telling me about it. Willie, like so many people, in the back of the book, I have shots of Kelly as a little 14-year-old kid, and it was an interesting contrast seeing early Tommy surf and early Kelly. But the point of all that is when I first met Kelly, it was Sean and Kelly. It's brothers. When you meet these brothers, you don't say Kelly Slater, 11-time world champion. You say, hey, Kelly and Sean, or Sean and Kelly. Same thing with Willie. That's his brother Steve, and it was Willie and Steve, or Steve and Willie. Steve's the older. And it's so funny watching brothers. Sometimes, like the Hopgoods, they both turn out to be really good. Sometimes one's not as good and has to figure out how to make that work. And other times, like Steve, who is as good as Willie, but he says, okay, Willie's the pro. I'm going to figure out how to take my surfing in another direction and not be following a pro career, but I can relax and just enjoy surfing as a pastime. And so it's interesting watching how brothers go from their youthful competitive amateur careers into their adult life. This is called waiting for low tide. Our routine, an interesting thing is, when I got to Santa Barbara, the mindset was, if Santa Barbara's not breaking, it's flat. And so one day after a good swell, I was complaining, God, I wish there were waves. And the guy goes to me, goes, well, I know an hour from here where it's about 8 feet and grinding. And I'm like, thinking that this is a joke. I go, well, let's go. He goes, well, it's an hour away. I go, if you're serious, let's get in the car and let's go. And again, coming from Texas, and this is where coming from Texas in the surf world was a great benefit, is that creativity comes from the lack of. And so not having surf, I wanted more surf than anybody in Santa Barbara evidently did. And I said, I'm ready to drive anywhere, anytime. I had to drive an hour to the beach just to end up for 2-foot slop. I will drive an hour for 8 foot and grinding. And so we started this journey of driving to Ventura, which was not blocked by South Swell. South Swells were not blocked from the Channel Islands, and got more waves than we would come back, and everybody would be walking around like it's flat. And we just finished, me shooting, who I was with surfing, perfect 6 to 8 foot surf. And I never quite understood that. One of the things I appreciate about Willie is, like Jamie, he comes from the valley where they have to get in a car and go search for waves. So Willie was very willing to meet at Santa Clara. So every morning we would meet at Santa Clara, surf it till the wind blew out, and then we would end up at Rincon. If Rincon was breaking, or depending on what time of year, maybe it would be Malibu in the summer, and we were waiting for low tide. And the shot of him doing the single fin slash was from this day, I believe.
Who's that sitting there?
That's Dino Bartoli wearing the Malibu Surfing Association competitive. Yeah, no. The Malibu guys love that shot because of the shirt. Tommy, this is the side of the old Channel Islands factory in the alley. A lot of you guys, Guy Motil, at this in the 80s, he shot a shot of his brother Gary, maybe, and the background was this stucco, and all of a sudden every photographer was looking for a stucco background because that was the cool thing. And so this was my Guy Motil shot. And this board, by the way, a guy contacted me in Australia who, I forgot the name of the surf shop, but he's on the West Coast. I wish I could remember the name of the surf shop. He has his board. He bought it for $100 and still surfs it. And he sent me photos of it. It, hands down, uncategorically, is the same board. And it's in good shape. I'll have a whole... I tried to think, what would you guys want to see as the extra part at the end of the slideshow that's not in the book? And so it's guys surfing the ranch like Tommy and Willie. But this is Tommy at the ranch, probably at St. Augustine's, which was very no-no to shoot back then. Still is. All this being recorded, right? This is a reenactment at the 1981 Malibu Pro, literally at Malibu, the reenactment of Big Wednesday in PT. Johnny Fain. I was too scared to go and take a photo of him from the front because he's like an icon, dating back to Gidget movies. So I got a shot from him in the back. Shot him in the back, yeah. Sean and his brother Paul. Now when you point a camera at somebody, they go into their social media pose right away. Most of the times when you pointed a camera in 1980 at somebody, they got awkward and didn't know what to do. Sean, because he was photographed so much, would do what we would call today kind of Instagram pose. And then, so I didn't know Sean at this point, and when he gave me that big smile and looked at me, I kind of went like that to him. And I was like, oh, darn, I just said, I'm going to cut your neck off to a guy I didn't know. But he instantly got it and ignored me and then went about his business. And so you have about 5 seconds of pointing a long lens at somebody before it starts getting awkward, and you got to get your shot. And back then, you didn't burst. You shot 1 or 2 shots, and that was it. You didn't go, ch-ch-ch-ch. And even today, I'll shoot family shots, and we'll burst 50 shots, and I'm still photoshopping heads from one, body to another to get the perfect shot. Okay, 1982. So Surfer Magazine is obviously heavily represented here, but there was this other magazine. There's Breakout, which is represented. There was Surfing. And I did not like going to contests at Huntington Beach. I didn't like the parking. I had this world up in Santa Barbara where there are very few other photographers. I had some of the best surfers at that time to shoot. Why would I go to Huntington and mess with all the crowd with 20 other photographers? The night before, this is the inaugural OP Pro, Larry Moore at Surfing Flame calls me and he says, how would you like to go to the U.S. Open and have the best seat in the house and not have to park at Huntington Beach? I said, sure. So he gave me an address. I ended up in Long Beach at the Blimp, the Goodyear Blimp hangar. And so next thing you know, I'm in the Goodyear Blimp flying over the U.S. Open, and I show this photo to the kids, and they always go, I didn't know you had drones back then. And and the story in the book kind of talks about it, is there's kind of a funny anecdote about driving the blimp and how difficult it was compared to a drone. The joke we had about this guy who would show up is we didn't know whether he slept up in that top little section, whether he dreamed about perfect tubes or nightmares going over the falls. But it's funny, sometimes I end up having to explain things for whomever's younger in the audience who went around this time. And the Police was a band. But this is kind of interesting because it's a sign of the influence of Channel Islands moving outside of the local area of Santa Barbara. This is at Emma Woods or Ventura Overhead in Ventura. This is really interesting. The localism, by today's standard, was pretty intense back then. But, it wasn't. You hear stories about Oxnard and Silver Strand, which I never shot back then. I shoot there now, and I'm always scared when I'm there, and just because of leftover fears of back in the day where you get beat up or kicked off the beach if you showed up. But other than there, there was this influence and this underlying feeling of localism, but it was mostly laughed off. And I found this incredibly funny and amazing at the same time. There were no computers. This had to be hand cut with a stencil. Each one of those lines had to be carefully cut and then evenly done, evenly kerned or spaced. And then if you've ever sprayed onto a curb before, it's very difficult to have it clean and not overspray and bleed. And somebody had made the effort to do this stencil and then go about every 12 yards. They had this on the curve all around the Rincon parking lot. And I still, to this day, I have to imagine at night somebody went there and did this. And to no avail. I mean, this is Rincon. This is not Oxnard. It's not the ranch. You're not gonna. There's another shot I have that's the stop sign painted right when you come down at the exit to get on the Bates Road to get on to Rincon coming from LA, and none of these things worked. This is not a statement of today. This is 1980 of people that did not want LA to come surf Rincon. This is Davy Smith. Davy Smith was equally as a gifted, incredible surfer as Tommy. He was one of the fathers of aerials, and which I'll have a little bit coming up. And we would hit this is a south swell spot that would break only in the biggest swells and the lowest tide in the North LA area. And every single time we went, whomever was surfing, board was broken. And just the significance of that is there were no quivers back then. You had one board, you broke your board, you went immediately to your shaper, and if you were a gifted team rider, you could probably get another board in a week or two. If you weren't, it could be up to 6 weeks. So he was one of the few people that could get another board relatively soon. Now, Tommy and Al were often, Tommy would ride a board. One thing about, and I'll get this in 1983, the surf was so consistent, and this was a big part of the growth of both Tommy and Al and the working together, is that he could surf a board. Al could discuss it with him. He would shape that board that night. Either he would send it to Bob Hawkins and glass it in Glida, or he would glass himself. And the next day, Tommy would be riding the next board after that. And that would continue. Tommy would go through board after board after board. And that was very unheard of at the time. This is probably the first aerial spin. He landed, but then the board's heavy. He just sank right in the whitewater. Surfer Magazine, introducing this. Up to this point, there have been shots of guys getting there, but not landing them. And so the big thing became to get a shot of a landed air. And that's the tips. For you guys who remember the tip section. This is Jay Adams. He was already an icon at that point. Like all of us, I started skateboarding either on steel or clay wheels, and followed that all the way to urethane into Dogtown. And him and Tony Alva and Stacy Peralta and et cetera, all guys I looked up to. I met Jay Adams at Malibu. He grew up with Willie and Steve and was friends with them. And a day, I did not know him, and he had a fairly heavy reputation. And we were at Second Point at Malibu, and he came in, and everybody was out surfing, and I always kept a jug of water because you're out there and it's pretty hot. And he comes right over to me, grabs the jug, and is getting ready to drink it. And I'm like, God, I don't want him drinking my water, and I'm frankly scared of the guy, and I'm like thinking real fast. I go, hey, I got the flu, and he's holding the jug, literally just getting ready to swallow half of the water, and he looks over at me, and he looks up and down, and he goes, I don't give a fuck, and guzzles half of it, and I tell that story to people who know him. They go, that's him, but he was a little fan of Debbie Smith and aerials. So I talked him into shooting a few times, and this is one of those sessions. We never got really good surf. But the next shot is a sequence. And if for whoever follows kind of skateboarding, surfing the skateboarding, that kind of era, you'll know the history of Larry Bertleman and then Dogtown doing their move called the Bertleman. And so the next shot is kind of life imitating art, imitating life, because his cutback is kind of imitating his skateboard Bertleman, not really the surfing Bertleman. Does that make sense? Yeah. So if you ever seen like the Stezik photos of him doing the Bertleman on skateboard, it's almost identical in body position. Kim Merrick. There were not as many, by any means, girl surfers back then, but it's misunderstood that girl surfers, there's this feeling that it wasn't until Roxy that girls were hardcore surfers. And I always call these, Kim and a lot of the girls that I knew in Santa Barbara as Roxy before Roxy. And hands down, Kim was one of the most gifted surfers in Santa Barbara. No classification of woman or guy. And this group of girls that we hung out with and Kim were every bit as surf starved and like in Blue Crush or how that was depicted in, when was that, the 90s? They were very much like that before then. And she was like, I know this isn't a right point, but like Tommy, she was definitely groomed in the long points of Santa Barbara with so much style. She's one of the most stylish surfers, along with Tommy. But just the ankle work there and her control. Tommy, this is Tommy. We would go to Leo Carrillo, Seco, Sequid, Mole Drive. I've heard it called that. It's a south swell spot where the channel winds would blow offshore there in the afternoons and the sun would set behind you, so it was like a studio. The motor drives were 3 frames per second. Now they're 20 on up. And to just put your finger down back then, you could actually get 3 shots in a sequence that were all horrible. And this is one of the lucky times where I just pushed my finger down and I got 3 shots, and each one turned out great. Everyone appeared in Surfer except for the last one, and the last one is the cover of the book. So that's the off the top. You remember that one, Jim?
Yes.
Okay. And then that's the cover of the book. 83, nobody knew what El Nino was. I'm sure the weather guys did, but it wasn't a household term. And when 83 hit, that's when everybody started, the buzzword started, and there were some days so big, and I'll show a few images that you couldn't surf, but it was just incredible how big it was. Was this past January 6th in Santa Barbara as big? It's hard to argue. It probably was. But just like every day of surf is not the same, it's hard to compare these every 40-year days. And the tide, the sand, there's so many different things about them. But I'm 64 now. I do not know how old this couple was, the guy with the longboard and the boogie board. But I still think of them as I move forward in life because they were intrepid and they could not surf. And that, if anybody's ever surfed, this is Sandspit in the harbor, Santa Barbara. If anybody surfed right at this spot where you go out right by, just to the right about that would be the end of the break wall. It's pretty intense. It's not for lightweights. And they would go out, and to them it was like a 2-foot day at the beach. And so and I never saw him catch a wave, but I always saw him come back around and go back out. And I swear I think of them often when I'm facing something like, oh, I'm too old for that. So this shot was published many, many times, and this slide kind of shows each publication has their little notes and writing on it, and I found that kind of interesting in itself. But that's actually, in the book it shows the whole maneuver, but that's actually a rebound on a cutback, which was very, aggressive and high performance at that time. Santa Clara mud pits, they would dredge the Ventura Harbor and deposit it over on Santa Clara, and it would turn into this muck. And it was really kind of it looked like when you'd first start walking from the parking lot, you put your foot down, you go, oh, that's not that bad. And you put the next foot down, and it seemed a little slimy. And then you put your next one down, and you're down to your thigh. And guys would run and get that 3-step thing. And I'm surprised no one ever broke a femur or because when you sink, you sink. Now, this was kind of set up. They worked themselves down that way. But we saw this elderly gentleman once around the evening walking his little Chihuahua, and he went to that 3-step thing, and next thing you know, he's up to his waist. His Chihuahua was too light, and it freaked out, and all within like maybe a millisecond, he was buried up to here. His Chihuahua went around him about 5 times and tied him. And there he would have been and probably passed away of hypothermia and been found the next morning if we weren't there. And he was very old, he was fragile, and we had to work him out. The whole time his dog is barking at us and going crazy. So it was the nice thing, I talked to Tommy about this, and he claims that the reason Santa Clara was so good back then is a lot of this clay that would come from the harbor would wash out into the break and solidify the sandbars and not have the sand wash away. So it's a historical thing up in that area. Does anybody know where that is? Yes.
My friend lived there.
Was he the?
His partner.
So maybe his son, a friend of mine, bought this. That's a friend of his.
70s. Yeah.
So we're just talking here about that's the park ranger home, and a friend of mine knows the park ranger's son who grew up there, and he bought this print for him. And then I cannot remember his name, but another artist, I wish I could remember, but he does a lot of woodwork, picked driftwood off this beach and made the frame and then gave him that. I wish I had a picture of it. It was pretty incredible. But that's way up in there. You can see in the upper left, there's the channel winds blowing. You can just see. So the surf was too windy up top. It's gone now. I don't know what happened to it. Yeah. El Cap, I'm sorry. Okay, this is where Scott Hewlett fact-checked me. So I've always said this is Paul Gross. And then in a feature in Surfer Journal a little while back ago, nobody ever told me this was Paul Gross. I just assumed it was Paul Gross. So I was talking with Grant Ellis. I go, it might be Greeno. Why don't we say it's Greeno? Because I had the opportunity to shoot Greeno, but at that time he was sailboarding, and in the early 80s there was kind of a schism between surfers and sailboarders, and I didn't want to shoot Greeno sailboarding. Looking back, I wish I would have done it. It would have been an unbelievable opportunity. But I always wish I had a photo of Greeno. And so I think Grant, are you over here? I thought I saw Grant. Yeah. I think you ran it by Scott, and Scott says, no, that's Paul Gross. And I felt like, no, you're not getting away with that, Jimmy. But I wanted so bad a photo of Greeno, but I never took a photo of him. But that's Paul Gross, who's an advocate, and that is a spoon, and that's Rincon, and backlit like that. This is shot from the highway. This would have been the best day ever. It was a one-day push that was not predicted. It's long before swell forecasting. You got your information from fishermen passing information down the coast. And it was high tide, and I took shots from the pier, and said, okay, I'll go get some breakfast or some brunch and come back, and it'll be low tide, and it'll be the best sand spit ever. I come back, and there were like 150 guys out, and it was like 1 foot. The swell just dropped immediately. So welcome to shooting surfing in ocean versus wave pool. So here's that big day I was talking about. This literally wiped out all the boats that used to moorn right out where in this area. And literally the next day, the beach was lined with probably 30 boats. I would say if that's Hammond's, that's the old Coral Casino Pier. A big day would be breaking out at the end of that. Talking to fishermen, there's a reef that goes way out. That's probably 10, 15-foot backs. It's ginormous. I saw similar photos from January 6th. Is it bigger? I don't know if it matters. Maybe once every 500 years it will get way bigger than this. There's a story about Pat Curren in 1 year on a very clean day, riding over the whole coast down, to the headlands you see further down where he rode a wave. This is Kim Merrick at Hammond's. I grew up on photos of Hammond's as this beautiful Ron Church photos, idyllic place, grass knoll, just like one house. I forgot what they called the house. There's a name for it. Right on it, over to the right. And to me, I love the shot of Kim. I'm glad I caught it from the water, but I always hated these condos being in the photo. They were just put where they shouldn't be. And then now I look at this photo and I'm disgusted with that I didn't buy one. Yeah. I bet they were $20,000 or $30,000 at that time. I think they're like 1.5 is the smallest unit. Caught out in the Channel Islands back then, they were able to catch them. This would go and be processed just like any other fish back then. Sharks are a scary thing. Everybody's had their experience. Everybody has their story. We all know that it's the only thing scarier than a great white shark is the ocean without them. With all that said, to see one in real life and to walk up to it and see it that close, it's you read the old history books and you see all those old etchings and monsters coming out of the sea from the old sailors, and you realize, these really are, whatever the image was depicted in these old etchings, this really is a monster. It's a very sobering thing to look at straight on that close. But it's very sad. The next day, the head was chopped off at the cannery, and it was just sitting there with the head up from about this point up. And I was going to take a photo, and I said, I just can't take a photo of it. It's even back then it was sad. So moving on. Another photo of quite an interesting group of people. That's Britt Merrick, who I always thought he was like 12, was 8 because he was such a big kid. I thought he'd be a linebacker. He's like, I don't know, how tall is Britt? 6'6"?
Something like that.
Something like that, tall, slim, and a good surfer as well. That's his sister, Heidi Merrick, fashion designer. Dave and Chris Brown. To the right, is good friend Dana McCorkle. One of the smiling faces back there, Matt Mondragon. He was on that once-in-a-lifetime photo cover shot of surfing taken by Aaron Chang of that big inside Sunset barrel. Joe Curren. Still good friends with today. And then Shane Robinson, Ken Robinson's, who's an abalone diver now. The little kid you can barely see with the elbow on the speaker. Willie this is the end section at Malibu, Kiddie Bowls. And there's a series of several photos. It kind of illustrates Willie's status at Malibu. He was kind of the prince right there. The board flips and cuts his foot. And what was the name of the head lifeguard back then?
John Baker.
John Baker, kind of an iconic lifeguard in the Malibu area back then, and it still is. I don't think he's still a lifeguard, but he's still well remembered. You would not get a lift in the lifeguard truck unless you were being taken to an ambulance. And so I've always loved this photo because there's a regalness to him getting a ride. Did he get gassed? Yeah, but could he have walked off on his own? Sure.
Yeah.
This is the final part of the book part. This is just a big day at Santa Clara. This is a guy named Ray Call from Ventura, one of those underground guys that surf like Jerry Lopez that you only saw when it was really big. Final shot. This is kind of represents at that time walking away from the future, walking away from the past. That's Al Merrick, Davey Smith, and Matt George walking away from a single fin and the kind of change that was going on at Rincon at that time. Okay, bonus section. Tommy at Ranch. It's called a no camera policy. I would shoot there on small days. I would get harassed sometimes. I was always with somebody like Willie, who gentle giant, but he's a big guy. So when he walks up to somebody giving you a hard time, they immediately shut up and back off. I am not a big guy. I'm not a threatening person. So I didn't elicit that kind of response very often, but Willie would if it ever happened, Willie would just walk up and it'd be over with. These were never meant to be in the magazines. They were just for fun. And then over the course of being there as a surfer, I caught the ranch unbelievable many times and surfed it, but never shot it. But these are just to enjoy. I'm glad I took these photos, because just historically shooting Tommy at the ranch back when he was a little kid, I'm glad to have these. Most of these are either Rights and Left or St. Augustine. Willie. And this interesting enough, Miss Curren took us in on this trip. It was Willie, Kim Merrick, Tom Curren, myself, and then a friend of all ours, a surfer named Shanna Farrell. And I cannot find the shots of Kim. Each surfer in a different box, and I think it's in a storage somewhere. And it was frustrating. I couldn't find it before we did the book. But you can see her paddling out. That's Tommy and Kim paddling out with Willie, doing the slash. That's right where it sucks out on the reef. And that's Shanna Farrell in the front. So we were all kids. And everything we did was just kind of goofing around. So the opening photo of Willie has been used many times, and it's a serious photo. It really started with us just goofing around. And then if you think back that very first photo, I said, okay, get serious for a second. We took that photo. And then when it turned into a mud fight, I had to put my camera down so my camera didn't get ruined. And we all left pretty stoked that day and welts all over us. This is another day. I kind of like this day because historically, if you guys follow the John Severson trip with Rick Griffin and somebody help me out, who all went? They painted the bus. Pacific Vibrations. I think it was a scene in Pacific Vibration. That and what it was Crosby, Stills Nash song. I cannot remember the song.
Don't know.
But anyway, that was kind of this iconic ranch trip, and the waves and our whole experience was very similar to this trip. Angie Reno maybe was one of the surfers. Does this ring a bell with anybody? So this is probably rights and left. And I think this is the last slide. Tommy at the ranch, kelp beds in the background. Follow me, check it out. Thank you. Will it make a noise right now? It's whatever anybody wants.
Yeah, we can you want to flip the lights back on?
Yeah, I don't want to see that. It looks like I'm just a quick chip. No, but a quick little bit. Does anybody have any questions or happy to answer?
Yeah.
I have a question, Jimmy.
Go ahead.
Is there a favorite photograph or favorite moment from that period?
No, more of the collective work. I'll say, and I said this before, I was this earnest kid from Texas who wanted to be involved in the surf world and was going to do anything, and chose photography because I knew I was not going to be a Tommy Curren. And I can tell you that every moment that I was there shooting was as exciting as you would imagine it to be. And I shot everything. I couldn't get enough. I wasn't raised in California. A 6 foot perfect day wasn't something that I grew up seeing every day. I didn't take it for granted. And I think I sometimes drove people crazy because I wanted to shoot in anything. At that time, Tommy was needing to, Tommy's mother, Janine, took him to all the contests. I mean, whether it was Texas, Cape Hatteras, wherever. And when I came along and was able to drive, it kind of relieved her a lot of the day-to-day stuff, and it helped Tommy get around and surfing every day and get into better waves. And I think more so than photos, I think just that experience, being around Al and all that, and watching the progression of Tommy, Willie, Al, watching the progression of Channel Islands and people from other surf areas start to, like Alan Sarlo and Ted Robinson and guys at that time, Californians, and eventually internationally, guys coming out, just being around that and watching that and having kind of a fly in the wall perspective with my camera. That's probably was my biggest takeaway. And the photos as a collective, I really love, and that's what the book is about. But individual photos on any given day, I would like one photo over the other, just depending on whatever. Anything else?
Wasn't it amazing that the thruster came along just then? and just boosted the whole thing.
Yeah, so the 3-shot sequence, the cover shot, that's the first time I shot Tommy in a thruster. It's the second time. The first time was at a place called Oil Piers, which is a little wind swell, and it's about 2 feet. But that's the first real waves. So an interesting thing about Tommy's surfing is, like I was saying, I shoot today, and I see hundreds of kids that were as good now as Tommy was at that time. Are they as talented? That's actually different than how well they surf. And Tommy's ability on the twin fin, as you watched him, it was very flowing and very stylish, and that's what made it so special, is he could go anywhere on a wave and do it with ease and style. But when the thruster came in, that's all of a sudden, I don't know if I noticed it while it was happening, but looking back in the photos, and hopefully through the book you can see that, is all of a sudden, just as the name of the board suggests, you just see power. And you see square turns, and you see straight up off the lips rather than dancing off the top, which nowadays you think of guys like Trevor Gordon or Michael M. Phelps and all these guys on these twin fins, beautifully gifted surfing like that. But at that time, moving into what was high performance surfing, is you wanted straight up off the lips and power. And man, that thruster, you noticed it in Tommy almost immediately. It was really, especially looking back. Yeah, it was an amazing thing. You know, I do have a photo in the book of Simon Anderson and Al talking right about the time. So this would have been the Malibu Pro in '81. And I asked Al, I go, what were you talking about? And he goes, oh, I don't know. He goes, don't make too much of that. But, you know, so there's two gifted shapers, two really incredible stories and contributions. And Al obviously wasn't the creator of the thruster, but the work he did with Tommy in refining that thruster is. I'm always asked, would Tommy have been Tommy without Al, or vice versa? And I never really have an answer for that, because that's not what happened. I can just tell you that together it was really an incredible synergy, and the thruster was a big part of it. Yeah, that thruster coming at that time was just an incredible timing. Absolutely. And hopefully that's reflected in the book. You don't have to have questions, just...
Yeah, I had a comment question.
Yeah.
I think you coming from Texas and going to the backwater underground surf world of Santa Barbara was part of the chemistry of the moment and your luck and the destiny that you had. And I think it all worked well. And, you know, the technology is so different now. I mean, now, you know, if you want to talk to a girl, you know, or a guy, it's online, you know, and it's on, you know,
Right.
your chat. Back then, you actually had to, you know, muscle up and get the phone number or talk in person. If you wanted to go see a beach, you had to like go there. Now it's online.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, now if you want to see a swell, it's showing up within hours after it, or it's live. Wait 2 months for the magazine to come out, like you pointed out. But I think it's really cool that you had that respect for certain areas, being sacred and quiet. I'm sure the boys and the girls of your area kept you that way.
So, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, and so, because then I'll go into my question real quick, and I think that's really good, and I see that. I know that you were that way. I saw these photos. I'm seeing again for the second time. I think it's the first time inside the California Surf Museum where we've heard such names like Shanapata, Rivermouth, Super Tube,
Right.
You know, and so that's generating my questions to you now, and I ask respectfully, and you can answer truthfully or however you want.
Oh, absolutely.
But my question is, were you ever taken out and surfed and photoed the Channel Islands?
So I could probably like spend 10 minutes talking about this. I'll try to make it really brief. I did respect all those areas. And truly, so that what I'm about to say It's not one or the other. It's both at the same time. I didn't want to get beat up at Oxnard. I respected ranch. I don't want to get into the politics of the ranch and the future of it and everything, but it is just an incredibly beautiful place that I want everybody to have access to it, but I don't want it to change. I think that's a very politically correct way to respond to that. The islands, I also respected, and a lot of trips were made by Tommy. A lot of things I weren't a part of Tommy and Al going out there. That's where he first saw and coined the double pump bottom turn of Tommy. And I only know that from him telling me. I didn't see that firsthand. I would have loved to have gone out to islands to surf, not to shoot, but I get seasick looking at the channel with a 20-knot wind and a 10-foot swell. So I stayed away from the islands for many reasons. But the final thing on that is there was so much surf in the Ventura, the 805 area, that you did not have to go North County, Ranch, Islands, or Oxnard. There's the Santa Clara area was a very localized area. Just before I got there, the first guy that actually took me there said, "I'll take you there, but we're not going to bring boards." And I know the gentleman's name. He kind of policed that area. He just kind of disappeared at that time, and all of a sudden it was just vacant. And we showed up and just had free reign. Towards the end of the time that I was there, the 4 years, Oxnard Shore started to get a good sandbar, and we started to move that way, and we were not bothered. And if you know that stretch of coast, we're starting to push towards Hollywood and ultimately Silver Strand. And I heard after I left that they started cracking down on Oxnard Shores. I was at Silver Strand about 2 weeks ago, and I'm shooting, and every 15 feet is a kid shooting. And I happened to be next to this old guy shooting, and I'm 64. And he starts screaming, "Get out of my circle!" And if you talking to me, and he goes, "Yeah, get out of my circle." And he starts going off about all these kids shooting here in the old days. And so I went up and talked to him. I said, I'm 64, and he was 58, so that kind of put him in his place. I said, I lied to him. I said, "I've been shooting here." Is this being recorded? I don't want to run into him if he sees this. I lied to him and said, "I've been shooting here since the day," and we talked about how it was. He goes, "So you know." So he ended up being, he's my buddy now. I see him all the time now, and we high five. But he said, "I would have been the guy that would have thrown you off the beach," and they would have, I've heard plenty of stories. The bad area was like around Point Saul and stuff. Davy Smith said they went to a party once where back then you go to a party and there are 8mm films and they would shoot of them surfing. And he said the highlight of the movie was somebody parked their car at the edge of the cliff to go surfing there, and all the locals pushed the car off the cliff, and they're all drunk and screaming. And he says, and so I said, I was asking, "Why don't we ever go to Point Saul?" And he told me that. So, and then there was one other story real quick. At Super Tubes, I met this one surfer who was an Oxnard guy. He says, "Look, Jimmy, come to our parties and get to know the guys, and once they like you, they'll let you shoot." And I was with a mutual friend, Dana McCorkle, who he was like about 16 or 18, 6'2", built, just naturally built, like a guy you would want to be at a party that got out of hand with. And he said, "No." He goes, "We're not." He goes, "Once they see your photographer, once they've had a few drinks, even if the photos aren't of Oxnard, they'll start going off." So I just never pursued it. So I think I kept it under 5 minutes.
What lenses were you shooting on back then?
So the standard, like from the beach, was Century 650, and it was the one thing that was very difficult back then was follow focus. There was no autofocus, and if you got a roll of film back and you had 50, 60, 70% of your shots in focus, you were doing well. So there were incredible shots that are out of focus and not usable. But even with autofocus, sometimes your whatever autofocus method you use, you're trying to keep it working for you, and you get off, and then still the best shot's out of focus. That's always, but it's way better. I would not be able to shoot at the level I shoot now because of my not having, 19, 20-year-old eyes. If it was still out of focus, it would be a young man's game for sure. But the Century 650, And then Nikon equipment, Nikkor lenses.
What do you use in the water?
Scott Price water housing 30. Flame tried to get me to use a 50, and I like the 35. And the reason I like the 35 because a 35 could flatten a wave, and so that was a disadvantage. But everybody shot with the 50, and I always said that you'll appreciate this, the surfer guys. And anybody who remembers the Island Santosha and the cover of Surfer magazine, that taught me how beautiful surfing is shot backlit. And then the early 80s tried to train all that out of you in front lit. Because competitive surfing was started, they wanted front lit, they wanted to see the logos on the board, and they wanted close and tight high performance. And so Flame wanted me to have that 50, which is better for that. A 16, you start getting in a whole different, that's more like shooting pipeline up close, sticking your camera out. A 35 kind of involves you, if you get the right shot, like that shot of Willie doing the slash, involves you. You're not outside looking in, but it's not so wide that it's warped too much. And you didn't have to follow focus. It had enough depth of field.
Jimmy's going to be signing books. Jim, are we going to do it here or how?
We have a table right there.
Yeah, and we keep the conversation going and chat more. Thank you all for coming.